Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karakura Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis as well as personal response, and discussion of how these chapters connect to the rest of the series. As usual, we'll be beginning with a reading of the chapter that we are currently on. This is going to be the beginning of Volume 7 and Chapter 53. So let's get right to it. This is Bleach Volume 7, a Shonen Jump manga with story and art by Kubo Tite. Recent photo of the author. Since I moved here last year, my landlord next door has taken a real liking to me. His wife even cooks for me. The food's great and I'm thankful, but I feel bad because I've never told them that I can't eat onions. Kubo Tite. Bleach is author Kubo Tite's second title. Kubo made his debut with Zombie Powder, a 4-volume series for Weekly Shonen Jump. To date, Bleach has also been translated into numerous languages and has inspired an animated TV series that began airing in Japan in 2004. Beginning its serialization in 2001, Bleach is still a mainstay in the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump. This is rated T for teen, for ages 13 and up. Volume contains fantasy violence and tobacco use. We should not shed tears. That is a surrender of the body to the heart. It is only proof that we are beings that do not know what to do with our hearts. Bleach, Volume 7, The Broken Coda. These are the Bleach All-Stars and Stories. We have Kisuke Urahara, Renji Abarai, Byakuya Kuchiki, Ichigo Kurosaki, Rukia Kuchiki, and Orihime Inoue. Our plot so far: 15-year-old Ichigo Strawberry Kurosaki can see ghosts. Otherwise, he was a typical high school student until the day a hollow, a malevolent lost soul, came to eat him, and the Soul Reaper, Rukia Kuchiki, stepped into his life. To defeat the hollow and save his family, Ichigo let Rukia transfer some of her Soul Reaper powers to him. But when Rukia was left powerless, she recruited Ichigo for her war against the murderous, soul-gobbling hollows. In mid-duel, Ichigo and Uryu Ishida, the Quincy, team up to fight the gigantic Minos Grande. In the process, Ichigo discovers latent power he was not aware of. In the aftermath of the battle, Rukia decides she has lingered in this world long enough. But things take a disturbing turn when she finds herself face to face with two hunters from the Soul Society. Bleach Volume 7, The Broken Coda. Chapter 53, Nice to Meet You, I Will Beat You. Uryu, what are you doing here? Just passing by. No big deal. Well, if you must know. I felt a sudden urge to go to Sunflower Seams, that 24-hour dressmaking shop. There's a branch near here. That's where I was headed at this late hour. I certainly didn't bring this bag with me just so I'd have an excuse for suddenly leaving the house because I sense the spirit energy of a Soul Reaper, okay? Wow, that may be the worst lie ever told. Can he be that stupid? Stop yapping, Four Eyes. I'm asking you a question. Who are you? Well, if you don't like answering, fine. I can just kill you. Wait, Renji, he's got nothing to do. What was that? I'll answer you. I'm a classmate of Rukia's, one who hates Soul Reapers. That's not what I asked you. I'm Uryu Ishida. Nice to meet you. Huh? You're strange. Well, I had thought you had a right to know. You're a Soul Reaper, but you should know the name of the one who kills you. Oh, that does it. You're dead meat. Renji, no! Uryu. Chapter 53 of Bleach. Nice to meet you. I will beat you. Where can Rukia be? It's already after 2. If she wants to stay out all night, fine. I'll take a night off from Soul Reaping and get some rest. Huh? Whoa, what was that? Whose voice was that? Mmm, 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 mmm. It's coming from behind the toilet? You? Cone? What are you doing back there? I didn't know you were into that kind of stuff. You seem agitated. You're lucky you can find the time to enjoy yourself. Mmm, mmm. Jeez, what a nightmare. Thank you, Ichigo. You're welcome. I couldn't see who was there, so I had to figure it out by the sounds. Gross. Yeah, it was tough before you came. I had to listen to 3 small tinkles and 2 big splashes from your dad. In fact, 5 minutes before you walked in, your father took a huge steaming. No wonder you reek. You should have told me sooner. What are you doing? Is this how you treat a friend who's endured a nightmare of captivity? Back, Stinky. Don't touch me. Get away. You're not my friend, toilet hugger. So, why were you tied up back there? What do you think? Only one person could have done that to me. Rukia. Oh! Oh yeah! Rukia! Rukia's in trouble! Yeah, get off! Look at this. She left a really short note. Didn't you notice it? Hey, what's this? I just told you. It's a note. She deserted us. Why? Why didn't she say anything? How should I know? I'm crushed. I was here when she left, but she abandoned me without a word of explanation. Oh, the pain. Darn. This note's the only clue we have. What's written on here? What's it? She was working on a stupid riddle right before she left? Here's a hint. What's this? Why a tanuki? Oh, I get it. Ta-nuki. Nuki means without. So I'll read it without the tas. I must go? Don't look for me, and don't worry about me. Burn this letter after you read it, and if you can, stay hidden for a while. What's this about? It doesn't say why she left. Do you understand? Huh? Something happened. Burn the letter and stay hidden? We're in danger. We must be. There's trouble between Ruki and the Soul Society. And to keep us out of trouble, she went off by herself. Maybe she's dead. Stop that. Don't jump to wild conclusions. We don't know what happened. Letting our imaginations run amok won't help. Ichigo. Come on, Khan. I'm gonna go Soul Reaper and find Rukia. Follow me. Okay. So, how are you gonna become a Soul Reaper? With that glove that knocks out souls? Doesn't Rukia have that? Then I'll just... Crap! I can't become a Soul Reaper without Rukia's help. What are we gonna do? If Rukia is in trouble with Soul Society, then I have to be a Soul Reaper to help her. Why are you yelling at me? Don't underestimate a stuffed animal. Hello. Looks like you have a problem. You're... May I be of assistance? Oh, one of my best customers is in trouble. I'll make an exception this once and do this on credit. See, what did I tell you? He's strong, even stronger than before. I couldn't stop him. I couldn't even move. Now, time to finish this. Reflect on your stupidity as you die. I'm Rinjiabarai, the one who killed you. Nice to meet you. What? Who are you? I'm Ichigo Kurosaki, the man who's gonna beat you. Nice to meet you. What's Ichigo doing in there? Really, thanks, Ichigo. Don't touch me. That is it for the beginning of Volume 7 and Chapter 53. And of course, in my haste to return to the volume cover, I accidentally double-clicked my program that I used to read this manga on, and so therefore I minimized it, and in doing so, I lost focus from my recording software, and it stopped recording. So I'm going to have to splice this video with the previous one, which isn't a particularly hard thing to do, but I do try to do the least amount of editing on these videos because I like to give it all in a single take. I like it to be as unpolished as possible. Not just, because one, I'm not getting paid for this. Any amount of extra time that I put into it is time that, I'd rather be spending on actually making the video, if that makes sense, or like sharing thoughts, so on and so forth, doing something kind of productive with that time towards the video. And if I can cut out things like, writing a script or fussing with editing or any of that, that is what's kind of ideal to me. Part of why I don't really make a lot of YouTube videos, despite maybe having a capacity for it, is because it is a lot of work, and unless you're really being paid for it, it kind of has to be a labor of love. I can do this series because the compromise that I've made with myself is that one, with them being a daily uploaded series, the expectation is maybe they'll be less polished there. Two, it lets me kind of build a testing ground for this sort of content to see if it's the sort of thing that people like, or what they respond to, what could work, what doesn't. But then the really big thing is that I really want these videos to be genuine. I want this to really be a catalog of my own critique and thought on the series. And in a lot of ways, the further that I get away from doing it all in one take, or doing it in this kind of unscripted, unpolished manner, the less genuine I really feel that is, right? So I feel like if I had to write a script for these, it would be less earnest. And I kind of want this to have the cadence of you reading through a series with somebody who is not just, I don't know, like a random composed internet stranger. There's plenty of that on the internet. But I wanted to kind of provide kind of more. I don't know. I want to say like you're talking to a friend about the series, because that's weird and parasocial. But like the kind of discourse that you might have with somebody that you are familiar with, right? If you were just talking about the series with somebody else, obviously they're not going to have a whole script about everything that they liked about a chapter, right? And I think the kind of video essays that I usually see on YouTube, while fascinating and I appreciate them, I don't think they're earnest in the way that this kind of content that I'm creating is. Anyway, I could talk about that forever. Let's talk about Bleach. So, this is volume 7, and I will go on a slight aside because there are a few things that are kind of significant towards that aside. Only a secondary one, not tertiary this time, I swear. But this is the first volume in which we've gotten a character on the cover of the volume that is not one of our protagonists, right? And I guess you could argue maybe with Urahara that was sort of the case, where we had these really close-knit, even point of view stories from Ichigo and Rukia and Orihime and Chad, right? Our first couple of characters that we have gotten on volume covers. And then Uryu was sort of an antagonist, but he came around, and then we got from like stories from his point of view as well. Even got some flashback from him. So, we've really seen those first volumes have all been characters on the cover that have made up our main cast of protagonists. And with Kisuke Urahara on volume 6, we start to get the sense of characters that maybe aren't in our main cast being featured that way as well. Urahara certainly aligns himself with our protagonist, so he's not an antagonistic force, but certainly Byakuya is. At least whenever we start this volume out, he is. And, we'll come to see if that continues to be the case at the end of this volume, what with him being Rukia's brother and everything. But it seems like at the very least, for this moment, he is aligned against the protagonist, which is pretty starkly different from most of these volumes. I think the expectation, stumbling there, the exception is from Ishida, right? But Ishida, even then, we could maybe see him as coming around, right? Whether or not you bought into that rivalry whenever you saw Ishida on the cover is maybe a little different. Here is, like we get these characters that show up and they literally are saying, we're here to kill Rukia, right? So that's one kind of thing. But the other thing to consider, and this is what I was really talking about whenever I said I would get into an aside on this, is that these volume covers and the choice of the character that goes on them is obviously it's from Kubo Tite. This is all art done by Kubo, right? And so he's going to feature characters that feature kind of prominently in those volumes, or that are introduced or part of a significant amalgamation of the events in the volume, right? And so, whenever this is being published, you have to kind of understand, I guess, the publication of Shonen Jump, of the weekly manga, right? So the way this works is, every week, the various authors that are published in Shonen Jump, which publishes on a weekly basis, they finish their manuscripts, which are about 18 pages. They turn them in. The editors okay them, and they process it. If you're kind of interested in the nitty gritty of that, I highly recommend reading Bakuman, which is a series that's all about people being published in Shonen Jump, and coincidentally itself was published in Shonen Jump. Pretty good story, really interesting, and has a lot of insight into the industry, and especially into being published in Shonen Jump itself. It's pretty autobiographical, as it is. I mean, it still tells a fictional story, but you can really tell that Oshii and Obata are kind of drawing from their actual career. Anyway, Oshii and Obata, the team that worked on Death Note also did Bakuman. Bakuman, very good. Highly recommend it. Anyway, point being that all of these different stories get published into this collection that goes out every week. And then after so many of those have been published, the company Shonen Jump, or the larger holding, which is Shueisha, right, that publishes Shonen Jump, they then publish the collected volumes, which in the West we typically call those collected volumes of comics trade paperbacks, or trades. But in Japan they're referred to as tankobon, or kind of more commonly we've started to refer to manga volumes as just volumes. And you can see here that they even refer to it consistently here as Volume 7, right? And that's typically those volumes see a lot of sales as well and kind of drive the popularity of the series. But usually whenever the volume gets published, obviously everything that's in the volume has already been published weekly. So you have all of those chapters to draw upon for maybe who you're going to put on the cover of the volume, what you're going to put into the extra content of the volume. But then you have a few more weeks of publication as well that you can consider. So, as the time of choosing whatever characters on the cover, Kubo's already aware of all the stories that are going to be collected here, and what to write for that character poem, so on and so forth, is what I'm saying. So the choice of including Byakuya is kind of made and formed by an author who has already written all of these stories. So you have to kind of keep that in mind too. Um, and so you can kind of read the volume as well. Whenever you see the character on the cover, you're like, oh well, this character is going to be significant in this volume, right? And it's kind of telling because we have like Byakuya on the cover, but we don't see Renji on the cover, despite Renji being the one who is taking up a lot of screen time, who is very front forward and prominent and vocal, and is the one that's drawn his sword and all of that. So again, this is just, I think, it's subtle, and that's why I have to do all of this other explaining to kind of get at it. But it's a lot of Kubo really hinting, hey, Byakuya is the focus here. The heart of this story in this moment is in Byakuya less than it is Renji, even though Renji is the one that's doing a lot of the action that a lot of the focus is on. So I will always kind of try to draw a little bit of attention to Byakuya in these scenes because clearly it is something that has been signified to us by the volume cover. The other kind of cool thing is that we're starting to get these volume covers that aren't just the characters presented kind of head on. We got a little bit of that before, but here we really get from Baikua's posing as well as kind of the expression that he has. We get the sense of his character and kind of where he might be, kind of emotionally speaking in this volume. I really like the way that he's framed with the scarf kind of flowing upwards and a little bit over the cover, the title for Bleach, and off to the right. Kind of this idea of him descending or being even, positioned in almost like a heavenly way, if that makes sense. I don't know. It's like he's coming down from on high, which is cool because he's a Soul Reaper, right? And he is of this captain status and all of that. Anyway, could talk about publication for Shonen Jump and all of that forever. But I think the last thing that I will reiterate is that in a lot of ways, Kubo was really writing this for the collected volume, which I've said before. The idea being that, in these kind of collected volumes in the Tankobon, that's how it's going to exist for the most amount of time, and most people reading it after the fact are going to read it that way, right? Like for all of history, people won't be reading it in the weekly format that Shonen Jump typically gets published in, which is interesting because you have to consider, as you're being published, you want to appeal to those weekly readers. Your weekly popularity is pretty important. And in fact, there are people that theorize that Bleach got kind of unduly unpopular in the weekly stuff and that Shonen Jump sort of gave it a bad hand. I don't really believe that. I think that a lot of that is just like rumor and theory and hearsay. But certainly Bleach was more popular in its volume sales than it was ever kind of in its popularity in the weekly publication. It did really well in volume sales pretty consistently. Anyway, that is to say, the other big thing that kind of differentiates these collected volumes from the original publication is that they are a lot cleaner in their production. So the initial printing is on a much cheaper paper, and these collected volumes, they actually can do an editing pass. Usually the author gets to change any sort of mistakes that they might have made. So if a character's drawn incorrectly, like let's say their weapon is on the wrong side of their body, or they're wielding it with the wrong hand, something like that, just like little things like that, inconsistencies in how characters are depicted or how scenes are shown, those can be touched up or changed. Usually you don't see very big edits between the weekly publication and the volumes, just kind of interesting things on that note. But the other thing is that we do get those character poems from Kubo, as well as the little in-betweens in the chapters, and sometimes we even get omake chapters or content, which are, it's just like bonus stuff, more or less. So we'll talk about that when we talk about it. But needless to say, there is a reason that I'm reading the volumes and that I have the volumes saved and not the weekly scans, because one, weekly scans are scans made by fans. I guess all of its content is the volume content that you're reading online anyway, right? Um, they do they do weekly versions of stuff, but they have the source material to kind of work from, and it's higher quality. Whereas, private scannulator groups, they not just get a person that actually has a copy of Shonen Jump, and then they scan the pages, and then they, process it through editing software to kind of clean it up and touch it up. So another reason why we're looking at the tankobon and not the actual weekly pages is, one, this is how most people are going to consume Bleach. Two, this is the format that Kubo was really trying to write Bleach for. And three, there's a lot of extra bonus content there. So, talked about that forever. Let's get into the actual volume, huh? I like that it says recent photo of the author, but it's just this kind of glass here. I originally was looking at this and thought it was maybe a bottle of like ketchup or something. It still looks a lot like the Heinz logo, but it actually, I think this is genuine root beer on it. And I think this says Kings, maybe. It's kind of hard to make out exactly what the thing in the middle says. Heinz, I don't know. Something, but some genuine root beer. Who knows? Anyway, have some fun facts about Kubo that he can't eat onions. Not a lot there. We do get this character poem for Byakuya, as well as this kind of image of him looking to the side. And we can assume, like the other character poems, we can usually relate to them to whoever's on the cover, at least depicted within this page. So yet again, the focus is continuously on Byakuya. So here we get this poem that's for him and isn't one for Renji. Again, kind of something to be aware of. So it I think the other kind of big thing that opens up too, and something that I'm kind of realizing now, is that it also keeps it sort of vague as to whether or not Renji is going to just be a bit player. Like, he could get killed by Uryu or by Ichigo, right? If that's going to come to pass. So it kind of keeps that ambiguous, perhaps. I don't think that's the intent so much as the intent, like I said, I think is more just focus on Byakuya as a character and to really draw attention to him. Anyway, the poem is really focused on, again, the sort of emotions and the control of emotions. We talked about before, like the idea of wearing a human face, or how needless certain human emotions were, right? That they aren't any use to a Soul Reaper. And we get the idea of, shedding tears, right? And that you shouldn't shed tears because it's letting your heart be in control, right? And it's proof that you don't know what to do with your hearts. Yeah, that's pretty stern stuff. Obviously, shedding tears is fine, by the by. It's totally okay. But there is a bit of a stigma towards, crying, right? Like, if you're crying in public, something's wrong with you. Or you're uncomfortable in some way, or you're maybe not fit for something, right? If you see somebody who's supposed to be a professional get up in front of people and they break down crying, right? Well, we call that a breakdown. We don't say that, like, oh well, they were just in tears about something. But we see it as like a weakness in a lot of ways. Even in the West, it's kind of culturally seen that way. But I think certainly if Soul Society is meant to be evocative of this sort of medieval samurai kind of culture, the idea of, being in control of oneself and of not openly showing those sorts of emotions, that's pretty significant stuff, right? That's kind of part of this stoic code of behavior, right? What you should show in public, how you should present yourself, especially as a warrior or a being that is in control of oneself, right? And certainly, I think a little bit of that gets into like looking down upon others, right? That others that are being needlessly emotional, that they don't have control over themselves, right? They're giving into matters of the heart. And we start to get this kind of sense of Byakuya. The other kind of important thing here, though, is that this is still focused on this kind of struggle that Byakuya has about shedding tears, right, and having this sensation from his heart that he should shed tears, though he quickly upholds this idea that we shouldn't, right? That it's a surrender of the body to the heart. So there's this acknowledgement of the feeling, but there's this denial of it as well. Not denial of it saying that like he doesn't feel that way, but saying that he won't let that kind of get in the way of his duty, right? So if it's his duty to execute Rukia, he's still going to do it even if he does not want to, or even if it makes him sad. So we're starting to get a little bit of that here. Like, how could Byakuya be the sort of person to kill his own sister? Well, it's exactly this sort of societal brainwashing that he's undergone. Anyway, clearly he owes some great debt to the Soul Society. I mean, if you think about, he is a noble, he certainly has perhaps these expectations upon him. Anyway, getting into, we got a little bit to talk about before this chapter. Why don't? Sure. Getting flustered. So, yet another thing to bring up before we even get to the chapter, the volume being called Broken Coda, right? I haven't really talked about many of these volume names. I think most of them speak for themselves. One thing I did want to mention is coda is a bit of a strange word. It's not one that you typically come across. It is usually referring to a musical term. So the coda in a song is typically the like big ending of a song, like the finale part of a piece of music, right? Typically, it's a little bit different, and it closes out the song in some sort of significant way, brings things to a close. And whenever coda is not being used in reference to music, it's being used in reference to things, in the same similar sort of sense that the coda is the kind of end of something or the finale of something. And so for this to be a broken coda, it is maybe that we have these expectations of this sort of ending or this sort of finale moment, but it is being broken. So this is not the end, maybe is what this is saying. But I think it would be easy for somebody who didn't have that context to read this as broken coda and then just read coda kind of as maybe a different way of saying code, like a code of honor or like a creed. But no, coda is specifically talking about this kind of finale event. And so you have to kind of wonder, what might this mean? Again, we're building expectations, right? We have Byakuya here on the cover. We have this iteration of this broken coda, so maybe there's this sense of finality that is being shattered. What could that mean? Anyway, on to the actual chapter. And here, I love that we start, with this overhead with Rukia in between both Ishida Uryu and Renji. I will say one thing that I haven't mentioned about Ishida that I think is kind of significant and worth mentioning because it's something that I think a Japanese reader might be aware of, but an English one almost certainly wouldn't. So Ishida's name is written with the same characters as Ishida Mitsunari, or Mitsunari Ishida, who is a very significant historical figure in Japanese history. So, if you're unaware, where to start with this? I guess the short story. At one point, Japan had a huge civil war, and at the climax of that civil war, leading the forces on one side was a guy by the name of Tokugawa Ieyasu. He ended up winning and setting up the Tokugawa shogunate, which kind of ushered in a whole new era for Japan for quite a while. Very significant, right? On the other side was the inheritor of the old kind of dynasty, this guy by the name of Mitsunari Ishida. And so, by naming a character Ishida and using the exact same characters to write his name too, that's the other kind of significant thing, because you can name a character the same thing, but use different characters in their names to kind of give a different sense of who the character is, right? Not to really allude to other people, famous or otherwise. It's not really something that we can really do in English, you know. Um, but it'd be like, I think it's worth mentioning. It'd be like if you were reading a comic and a character showed up, and their name was a clear allusion to like Abraham Lincoln or something, right? Um, Except in this case, it is the commander of the forces that lost, so typically seen as the antagonistic force, even though they were the ones that were kind of inheriting the rule from the previous, dynasty from Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the Toyotomi sort of clan, their whole deal. So the reason I bring that up is that I think for a Japanese reader, they would probably make a connection between Ishida Uryu and Ishida Mitsunari, right? These two Ishidas, both of them sort of inheriting this great kind of conflict, and standing and maybe even living and dying for what they believe in on their side of things. And certainly, Ishida is a Quincy and has inherited this huge conflict with the Soul Reapers. And at first, we might feel like Ishida Uryu might be the historical sort of the analog to an Ishida Mitsunari as he faces off against our protagonist, or if we were to read Ichigo, maybe in the face, like in relation to Tokugawa, right? That Ishida might be this kind of historic rival for Ichigo, right? Somebody to be defeated by Ichigo, but instead he isn't. But still, there is this idea of inherited sort of battle against, these conquerors that are, I mentioned this also because clearly Shinigami evokes samurai, right? So you have these samurai conquerors who are going to kind of wipe him and his people out. Kind of a neat connection, not really one that I didn't, it's one that I only kind of thought of the other day. I was like, wait, let me go look up their names, and sure enough, like I said, they're written with the same characters, um, as far as I can tell. You know, let me know if I'm completely off base with this, if there's anybody that knows a little bit more than I do. But I think that connection, at least, is one that's important to draw, and isn't one that I really have heard anybody else ever mention. So I might be, like I said, completely off base with this, but it is something worth mentioning because I don't think the average non-Japanese reader would even think of that. But I think that stuff is certainly there. You think about like why our characters are named certain ways. Obviously, Ichigo is named Ichigo for pretty significant reasons. I think we've talked about what Ichigo's name evokes, right? But we haven't really talked about a lot of these other character names so much, and I don't know. I might spend a little bit of time with the character names as they're introduced, at least significant parts of their names. I know that part of Aburai's name kind of evokes the idea of the color red, and he has pretty stark red hair. So, anyway, at least if I can remember correctly, I think that is the case. Now we can finally talk about the chapter. I know we've been talking about so much stuff that has to do with it, but haven't gotten really into the moments themselves. Of course, we can see our favorite character, the power lines in the background here. I do think Byakuya here is drawn perhaps looking a little too young. Again, I think there's just too much, proportion of like forehead and cranium to the rest of his face. His expression being, I guess his eyes and just the way his features are laid out make him look pretty young in this panel. A lot younger than even Renji here, which is striking. Whenever he's meant to be Renji's superior and older than him too. So yeah, strange. You could definitely see a difference between how he's depicted here and how he's depicted, on this cover, right? Uh, right. I mean, like he looks much more adult here, and I think that's kind of the look that he ends up landing on as we would go forward in Bleach. Anyway, we get this kind of reiteration from Uryu that, like, right, he was he was just going to the shop, but it becomes very clear that it was just an excuse that he could so that he could leave the house and look into the Soul Reaper energy that he sensed. Clearly, the idea that maybe he sensed Rinji and Bayakua rather than Rukia's, right? Um, I like that she says this is the worst lie ever told, but like I think he's not straight up lying or being stupid. Like I mean, he's explicitly saying, oh yeah, I didn't bring it just to have this excuse, haha, right? Like I think he's being cheeky in this moment, and I kind of like that from Uryu that we get this side of him that maybe we haven't seen so much. Renji's not having any of it though. Um, and cuts the back from his arm, showing perhaps a little bit of Renji's precision. I really like these very dark shadows thrown on Renji here. I love whenever Kubo does this sort of like intensely dark shading this way, right? Rather than doing kind of the cross hatch shading. I like that. I like the hatching. I think that's fine. I think the shading here is great and really sells Renji's expression in a lot of ways. But that kind of darker shading is fantastic, and I love seeing it there. It's good stuff. I mean, I'm a fan of it. Uh, Always reminds me of Hellboy. Hellboy is, of course, the starkest example of that I've come across. Whenever I was young, and has stuck with me since, is like the prototypical sort of example of using just black shading like that in comics. And again, getting flanked by these power lines, right? We get Renji really insisting upon like killing Uryu. So we get this bigger picture of not just who Renji is. Again, I mentioned him in the previous chapter really being kind of like a hunting dog or like some sort of snarling hound that Byakuya has sort of brought on this mission to be the one to talk big and bare his fangs, right? And certainly we get the sense of that with Renji's sword. Even the hilt of it's real jagged and kind of sharp. Has that sort of design to it. So Renji certainly is the kind of person that would say that he would kill somebody, and I think here he's meant to feel pretty lethal and feel like yeah he could kill these characters, right? And that the only reason he hasn't is that he's been intentionally sort of holding back to get a little bit of information. I do think it's interesting because, like, you think about it, and human souls are supposed to be pretty important to souls, like the Soul Reapers and everything. But I guess just the idea that if Uryu gets involved and gets in the way, then Renji has no sort of secondary consideration about, whether or not he's going to kill this guy. Again, we don't get any sort of confirmation about if Renji's aware of him being a Quincy or has the significance of him as a Quincy. And it's interesting that Uryu doesn't even bring it up. I mean, obviously he has the bow just earlier, right, in this panel, and in the one before he took a shot at Renji. Yeah, you see the ink's looking a little washed out on this page compared to the other one. Scan quality, I guess. Anyway, I will say that, like one of the things that I kind of like is this way that the panels are set up, right? So we get this Renji like, oh, well, I'll kill you. This very dramatic all black background for him, as we've had in the past, like these really dire moments we'll have with a black background, whereas these really kind of emotional moments or these moments that are supposed to really show a character and their being in their thought are being kind of emotional. We have the all white background, but yeah, here we're getting the all black one. But I also like this are you really standing up to Renji versus them being paneled against each other that way in profile. I think it's fantastic. Um, and yeah, Renji's expressions really sell him as this kind of violent, like, type of guy. I do like that we get this kind of more comical expression from him, right? Whenever Ishida says "nice to meet you," and then this weird kind of Ishida, facing downward on this panel to this panel as we read it this way. I don't know. It's just a neat inversion. We get him doing the very dramatic kind of pushing up the glasses, so we get this sort of typical expression from him, and then this really over the top expression from Renji as his canines are made even more prominent and sharp in this. As we get the sense that, again, very much like an animal as he's losing control. He's got the veins bulging. I think the way that his eyes are drawn really sell him as this sort of supernatural entity almost, or like perhaps even more primal or animalistic than the others. I think it's cool. Like, just the way that he's drawn really gives the sense of this very different kind of character. It's something that you lose in the anime. A lot of people will always, they'll be like, I think the casual fan will be very gung ho about just watching the anime, and I think one of the things that you lose in the anime versus the manga is these like real kind of focused moments of line work. So in the anime, obviously everything has to be animated. You still have key frames that you're focused on, but these individual moments you're kind of given less time to spend time with. And then, of course, the line work for the characters can somewhat get lost in the way that the animation has to sort of be uniform, right? So the anime, I think, never really gives quite the sense of like Renji kind of looking in these ways. We get a little bit of them, like we get his expressions and things like that, but like just the way in which the lines around the eyes, for instance, are drawn a little sketchier versus cleaner, here to here even, are like, from here to here in the different places that we see them. Like that can really give the sense of like intensity or frustration on Renji's part. There's just like a lot of stuff like that, like I said, like little things that the anime can't emulate that the art does a good job of conveying. Anyway, I love, again, are you with the pushing up the glasses, the one lens kind of reflective, the other one with the eye coming through. Just this, again, back and forth, the two characters and their expressions really sells that moment, and the difference between the two of them. Uryu's very cocky. Obviously, he says, you should know the name of the one who kills you, of course. And then, as we know, he gets off screened. So, rough stuff for Ishida. Pretty cool chapter cover. Reminds us that Tatsuki is in fact a character in Bleach. Anyway, back to Ichigo at the toilet. And again, we get that kind of serious moment undercut with one that's more comical, as we find Kon tied, or I guess duct taped to the side of the toilets. We get this back and forth. I think it is kind of funny. As Ichigo kind of comes to this realization of this note that's been left behind for him by Rukia. I was thinking a little bit on this, right? Why, like, there's, this whole code that she leaves on the note, right? And I think ostensibly the idea is that she doesn't want one of Ichigo's sisters maybe to find it and to be able to decode it and, kind of make heads or tails of things, perhaps, to not give Ichigo up. But I think the more significant reason for reading this message is like this, is so that Ichigo doesn't kind of respond in perhaps a too, like short-sighted way. That he has to take a moment to actually read and consider the text of this message. And it also gives her a little bit more time to put more distance between herself and Ichigo, right? Anyway, of course, the hint being reliant on interpreting her tanuki, which is this, it's a raccoon. It's a species in Japan. It's pretty prominent and known for some of its spiritual connections, even. They're typically kind of tricksters. So, maybe Ichigo's only able to decipher the fact that it's a tanuki because he's familiar with Rukia's very bad art. Who knows? Um, I remember the anime maybe having a gag like that too. Like, what the heck am I supposed to tell what that thing even is or something? I do like this close up on Kon whenever they're reading the letter and they finish it. Kind of dramatic shot of him to separate the page as we get to this more serious moment between Ichigo and Kon. I like the kind of concern that Rukia has, or not Rukia, but that Kon has. Obviously, Rukia does have concern, right? She's trying to protect them, and Ichigo realizes that here too. Um, and Kon comes to this kind of dreadful realization that maybe she's already dead, which is, a bit extreme. We have Ichigo being kind of serious, and this is, I think, the comedic moment that works for me the best. Is that, Ichigo turns around, he's being kind of solemn. He's like, okay, well, let's go. He's got like that kind of dramatic back turned away from us in the panel. Um, Kon's all inspired, and then we zoom out, and he realizes that there's no way for him to actually follow up in this plan. He doesn't have the glove, and he couldn't even fish the pill out of Kon's mouth because, in this case, this I don't think that would pull the soul out, right? You'd have to use the glove to actually knock the soul out of Kon into the pill itself, and then put that pill into Ichigo's mouth. So, you know, doesn't really quite work without the glove, right? And Rukia is the intermediary for that. Anyway, um, I like that they're going back and forth about it, and of course, Kisuke is there to help them out with his usual meddling. And here, yet again, we get a character aligned with the moon and the power lines and this kind of supernatural involved character, right? So, kind of cool that we get all that iconography all within Ichigo's window there. Do keep in mind this is on the second floor. You know, think of all the people that break into Ichigo's room. Rukia was the first to do it, and she just kind of phased through the wall. But yeah, you think about it. Obviously, Uriha is able to get up to the second floor. I'd love to see if, like, on the other side, it's Jita and Aru with a ladder or something. But I think we're not meant to question it. It's just supposed to be a pretty cool lean pose from Urahara as he's going to use the cane to knock Ichigo's soul out of his body and help him out. I like that he says he'll do it on credit, because of course he's got this whole businessman persona. But very clearly, Urahara has been involved in all of this and has been investing a lot into Ichigo and has been anticipating this moment. Anyway, as we return, we see that Uryu is stricken down with Renji kind of standing above him. Kind of an important thing to note is not just like Renji's stance where he's sword slung over his shoulder, hand in his pocket, sort of got a frown on his face, but kind of full of himself. But also, it's clear that he hasn't taken really any damage from this fight either. And I think, one, you could probably chalk that up to the fact that Uryu kind of engaged this fight from a disadvantageous position. If he's going to be a ranged fighter, makes sense to fight from a range. But then also, the other kind of significant thing here is that you got to keep in mind that Uryu is pretty significantly wounded and probably hasn't fully recovered from all of the battle and the climactic finale of our previous arc. So, it makes sense for him to quickly get overwhelmed. But also, a lot of ways this sells Renji as a very powerful opponent. If Uryu is one of the strongest kind of characters that we've seen in the series so far as Ichigo's peers, then what's the deal with Renji? Obviously, he must be even stronger, right? Typically, this gets referred to as jobbing I don't know that this particular instance really counts. I think a character just losing to another character is fine. That's normal. That's going to happen. The idea of jobbing comes from wrestling. That's where the term comes from. Wrestling's got all kinds of wonderful terms. But in wrestling, the idea was that, the matches are staged, right? Surprise, spoilers, by the way, for professional wrestling. But the idea is that, it's most of the time you're going to know going into the ring who's been to lose to the other person. And so the idea is that you're going to do your job and lose to them, and it's going to make them seem like the more powerful opponent, right? Usually to build them up for maybe an eventual defeat or just to hype them up otherwise, right? But the idea is that some wrestlers uh, kind of don't ever get their spot in the spotlight because of one reason or another. And so instead, they end up on a lot of these tickets where they keep showing up against these opponents, and their job keeps being to be, keeps ending up being somebody to get defeated, right? To prove, oh, this opponent is, so strong they beat this other person, right? They're undefeated, they've got all these matches, so on and so forth. And so typically those kinds of characters that kind of just exist to lose to a lot of people get referred to as jobbers. Um, you also, the other term that I've heard used before is like wharf, or like wharfing to people, which is reference to, of course, Star Trek, and the idea that there is the character Worf, who is supposed to be this powerful alien Klingon warrior, but then almost any time that a combat scene happens, Worf is defeated so that they can establish the stakes of how powerful these other enemies are, right? Um, so yeah, we'll see. I don't think Bleach completely escapes that sort of trope, the idea of a jobber, or having characters that feel like they're jobbers, right? They exist just to kind of build up certain antagonists. But I don't know. In a lot of ways, I don't really feel like it's a valid criticism in general. Like, yeah, characters are going to lose to other characters. Structurally, if you want to show that a character is powerful physically, there's not a lot of things that you can do, to do that, right? So having them overcome another character is one way you can do it. Yeah, it does make, cheapen the other character perhaps. And it maybe even cheapens the conflict if you read it from this kind of perspective of, oh, well, this fight only exists to make it to where this guy seems so cool so that whenever he gets defeated later, we can feel like the main character is stronger. It's like, yeah, dog, that's writing. Like, yeah, yeah, and that emotional story that maybe like made you feel really emotional. The only reason that the words were arranged that way on the page was to make you feel that way. The only reason why that character is a child and in a vulnerable position is because they know that you're going to feel close, like feel more for a child than you are a 30-year-old dude who lives in a basement. Like, it's all artifice. Get the fuck out of here. Anyway, I don't know. I think people could complain about like any little thing, right? But it's easy to feel connected to these characters is the important thing, right? And so whenever you feel like a character is kind of unduly beaten or being used just for a narrative purpose like that, it can feel pretty frustrating. Here, I don't really think that's the case. I don't think Uryu is really like jobbing to Renji. I don't think that at this point there's any way that Ishida would have been able to beat Renji with the amount of skill and training and you know everything that he has and the state that he's in. Right? Yes, narratively this does exist to just kind of build the stakes and to sell Renji as this very powerful sort of antagonist. Which, if he's this strong, then how strong might Byakuya be? Oh, right. But by the same right, I think the bigger thing is to kind of establish that like, I think dialing it back a little bit, pulling the thread back. A lot of people are going to read this as like, okay, this only happens so that Renji seems stronger, right? That to build up these antagonists, but that kind of neglects to consider the fact that Ishida Uryu willing to fight to the death, or willing to like kind of throw himself against this stronger opponent for the sake of somebody like Rukia, certainly shows a shift in his own perspective and defines the character in a lot of ways. And so I think even in losing, a character can be developed and we can find out new things about them. And I think that's certainly what's happening here for Ishida. We're kind of seeing just how much Ichigo has affected him in this short amount of time. But yeah, Renji's being real cocky with his sneer, right? And see what I tell you. It doesn't look like he's really had a elongated or prolonged fight with Uryu. Looks like he's just given him a quick slash again across the stomach. Really kind of laid him out in one. Rukia is reflecting on the fact that, of course, Renji is even stronger than before. So as we know, they have a connection, but here is affirmed. And that, Rukia kind of can't do anything in this battle. Here, I think the art gets a little messy with the way that he's shaded. I think they should have just gone for that black and white kind of really gray shading. I don't know if this text box is doing anything here, if it originally had something there in the Japanese and it just, in the English translation, I don't know what it's doing. If they just decide not to translate something or leave it blank, or if it was meant to convey just speechlessness, who knows. I do like this back and forth, like Renji raising this blade, being cast in shadow, the shot of Uryu kind of laying down upside down, even in the way that we're seeing, and then this really close up of Renji with this very small sort of eye. I think his eyes are in a lot of ways meant to be kind of snake-like, to really sell him as this sort of vicious character. And we get that here too, as he throws back into Uryu's face the same sort of, like lines that Uryu gave him, right? He's saying, "Reflect on your stupidity," right? And that's kind of interesting because we got that sort of disdain from Rukia towards Ichigo at the beginning of the series, where she really felt like Ichigo was stupid, that he was foolish. She was always calling him a fool, so much so that it kind of was a catchphrase almost. So I think the idea that Soul Reapers really look down upon humans as stupid, as kind of meaningless, as indulging in these emotional affairs, and as being kind of like cattle almost, to be shepherded, maybe is more appropriately how they consider them. It's certainly not benevolent whatsoever, which is a bit, tragic. But yeah, he throws back the lines, right? The name, his own name, the one who is going to kill you, right? Or the one who killed you, and then that "nice to meet you" line, which clearly threw Renji for a loop, right? Like, why would you say "nice to meet you" to someone that you plan to kill? Or use a weird dude. But before you can do that, as we can tell, this is very clearly Ichigo shattering the pavement underneath him. I love Renji being caught by a surprise, and also especially like this moment as he brings the blade down and this close up on his face is fantastic. I like the use of the same sort of like very small pupil there to connect from that panel to this panel, as he literally descends down the page to deliver the strike, and then we come to the next page and we see that has been upset by, of course, Ichigo. I like that Renji has this insistence on like, "Who are you?" like to everybody that he doesn't know. It's interesting that he cares that much about people's identities, but it gives our characters a cool moment to kind of introduce themselves. And certainly we get Ichigo looking pretty upset, stiff upper lip kind of moment. His huge, ridiculously large weapon, and this iteration, the man who's going to beat you, and then the using, maybe he doesn't even realize, of course, that this is originally Uryu's line, so it's kind of Ichigo doing the same thing that Renji was doing, like spitting those lines back at him because he's kind of gloating, right? But that "nice to meet you" line, which of course the chapter cover or the chapter title kind of references, right? Nice to meet you, time to beat you, right? I'm the man who's going to beat you. Kind of interesting is that Ichigo is the first one to insist on like beating them, right? So both Uryu and Renji use like kill, right? That they're going like Ishida's like I'm going to kill you, and then Renji's like, well, I'm going to kill you, and then Ichigo shows up. He's like, I'm going to beat you. So clearly Ichigo is not intending for this to be lethal, but that he's going to overcome this person in combat. And that's cool. We get Ichigo as like, he's not going to murder these people. He's going to try to figure out and get these answers. And so killing him is not going to solve that. It shows Ichigo as maybe being a little bit more pragmatic and less kind of, you know, I guess I was going to say dreadful, but less extreme than these other characters, right? Where they immediately go to these sort of, oh well, you're my enemy, I have to kill you. Ichigo's like, well, you're my enemy, I'm going to defeat you, right? So that is cool stuff. I think it's a really kind of triumphant moment where Ichigo shows off a lot of his kind of raw power, and we get this really cool shot of him. We haven't really gotten a lot of these moments of Ichigo arriving on the scene and being, just a cool shot of him. And so that's neat. Yeah, it's all good stuff. Whew, I've been talking about this chapter forever, and I've still got to combine this with the reading, so this is already well over an hour. Yeah, all in all, I think the art in this chapter is really, really cool. Pretty fantastic chapter for art. Lots to really give us a grip on these characters. What I do think is missing is that we only really see Byakuya there at the beginning of this chapter, and I don't think he's drawn particularly well. I think his expression comes across really well, especially in juxtaposition to Renji's, especially going forward, Renji's expression throughout these chapters. But Byakuya really feels like a backgrounded element in the beginning of this fight, and I wish we would have seen a little bit more of him there. He doesn't really even have to speak it or anything. He can just be really kind of nonplussed and looking not affected by the intensity of this battle that's playing out before him, right? So, yeah, I kind of wish we got to see more of him and that he was drawn in kind of a maybe mature looking way. But, that's maybe my only gripe with the chapter. Obviously, I think there's people that would say, oh, well, I wish I could see more of the fight between Ishida and Renji. But the takeaway there is that it really looked like it was only one slash, and that, Ishida didn't even get the chance to hit Renji with anything anyway. So, like, what is there to kind of imagine, right? You don't need to see that exact moment. Just jumping to the outcome is fine enough, I think, in this instance. Tells you all the information you really need to know, and the action can instead focus on these other really cool moments that I think drive things forward, like Ichigo smashing the pavement beneath Renji's feet as he arrives. I think that's like a much cooler moment than maybe anything that we would have gotten in that fight. But there could have been cool moments in that fight, so who knows? But I read it way less as like a full-fledged fight and more just a small exchange where Ishida quickly kind of got struck down. So we'll see how Ichigo fares in comparison, right? Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's really any other sort of things I want to talk about before I hop into the analysis for this chapter. And I say the analysis. Oof, I've been doing that all day. Before I get into the spoilers, right, and the connections to the rest of the series, I think I'm pretty much done there. If there's something that you saw or noticed that I didn't, or an element of what I brought up that you'd like to discuss, please let me know in the comments. As always, if you have something with spoilers, make sure that you tag it as such so that other people that are reading through the comments do not get spoiled. Yeah, that's practically it for my analysis and response. Another great chapter. I actually, whenever I talk about chapters that I really like, I do really like this one. I think it fantastically shows off these characters, especially Renji and Ishida. And then, like, I don't know, those moments between Ichigo and Khan I think are nice, especially the sorts of conclusions that Koan starts to come to, and the ones with Ichigo, and the back and forth that they're having. And it's cool that we get to see a little bit of Urahara in there too. I was perfectly expecting the chapter to end with just that shot of Urahara, but it continuing felt good. And I think it would not have been able to continue for that many more pages if we hadn't, if we hadn't skipped over a little bit of that fight with Uryu. Um, that said, it's a volume. We could have gotten it. So either way, whatever. The focus here is more on Ichigo and his interaction with these guys, as we are coming to find out. Uryu being taken out is sort of just a consequence of them being here. But I do like that Ishida did show up first, and that he did get to have this moment of confrontation. It's cool. It involves him in a way that he really didn't need to be, and I think is kind of neat, and I like it. Anyway, let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about connections. Let's talk about how moments in this chapter maybe connect to the rest of Bleach. So we already talked about Ishida and Byakuya's back and forth. I don't know, it's kind of interesting the idea of him kind of going out and getting stuff for, this seamstress. I'm again reminded of the Quincy using a lot of different tools, right? And so the idea that he's kind of got a 24/7 handy shop to kind of go to is fantastic. But also this excuse of leaving the house, right? Suddenly, I don't know how much that excuse works whenever, like, bro, your dad's a Quincy. Though at this point, I think Ishida is under the impression that his father's given up everything that, he, like, the whole kind of Quincy lifestyle, and then he's kind of put that behind him. So, maybe his father could sense that there might be Soul Reapers and would have let him out anyway. But something to consider, certainly. um, to this whole "Who are you?" bit from Renji for both of them. Renji develops a lot from here, doesn't he? I think he still kind of is quick to lose his nerve and is kind of less cool under pressure in a lot of ways. But I think we get to see him in maybe a less vicious way as we go forward. I do like that, like, I'm certainly seeing I mentioned it quite a few times, the snake-like aspects of his design, and this kind of animalistic sort of aspects of his design, which makes sense with Zabimaru, right? Being like this monkey and snake sort of combined thing, this king of the jungle sort of thing going on with Renji. So him having a design that reflects that, I think, is really cool. Anyway, yeah, I'm wondering if there really is anything else worth considering as far as connections go. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I could consider. I mean, here we do have, of course, Shirahara. We know from his conversation with Yorichi, knew that the Soul Reapers were here, knew that Rukia would have run and would have been ready to involve Ichigo the second that Ichigo found out. It's interesting that Urahara probably could have let him know beforehand, but like he waited till this last moment. Obviously, narratively, it's a cool moment for this to happen. But I think if we're to read it as, like internally consistent from the logic of Urahara's perspective, it's Urahara kind of seeing what Ichigo's going to do, and then providing assistance at the last possible sort of moment, as he is wont to do. Yeah, I have rough stuff. I like that, he's able to beat him even without Shikai, right? And I don't know if we get mentioned that he did use Shikai or not. I'm pretty sure that he didn't. right? I do like that, like, Renji has this big over the head sort of strike maneuver. Again, really reminds me of Ichigo. The Renji and Ichigo parallels run deep. But I really love that moment whenever Ichigo does fight Renji later and realizes Renji has a clear attack pattern and he has these openings and he is able to step in and strike him through those. And I like that we kind of get to see a little bit of that here. Um, Also, I think the other kind of cool thing happening here is obviously the difference between the size of their blades. This is also the last time that we would see Ichigo in this get up with the huge shoulder belt and the giant version of Rukia's Zanpakuto. So it's it's neat that we do get to see this form kind of given full on display before it would be lost forever. But yeah, kind of like almost feels like a celebration in a way there. Um, of course, Ichigo does make good on that promise, not in this moment, but eventually. Um, so that's cool. I will say, this does get animated in the Bleach movie. It's a bit different, but I think I'm going to make a video on the Bleach movie as soon as we finish this arc out, just because it does go through the events of this arc, and I think it would be cool to cover for the channel. I've already had that kind of in the pipeline for a while, but I've been considering exactly how I'm going to approach it and what I'm going to do for the video for it. But I think I've got that all planned out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I don't really have that many other connections. If you see other connections in this chapter, or other kind of little minor things that kind of came up, um, obviously this in a lot of ways is sort of reflective of you know like what we would come to get with the Soul Society arc. Like, Ichigo and his friends are going to come and rescue Rukia, and his friends get taken out pretty immediately. And then Ichigo shows up, to save Rukia while everybody's kind of gathered, and he has a cool moment. And gets to say some cool stuff. Of course, Ichigo gets beaten here, him succeeding in that is what we would finally build towards. But yeah, it's neat that structurally that's kind of there at the very least. Anyway, um, yeah, Renji's sword not being drawn quite that well here. I don't know what's really going on with his hand and the blade being a little off centered there. Maybe I have a little gripes with the artwork here and there, but it's by and large pretty good. Yeah, I can't really draw that many other connections, right? So if there are some that you have, if you're seeing some kind of larger connections or moments in all of this that you think are kind of significant, please do let me know. Um, I don't know, right? Like I said, I don't know how much else there are things to really extrapolate out. That is one of the kind of issues, is like, obviously I'm not always going to have a lot to say on this section of the video if there's not really that much that connects, because there certainly will be moments that don't really see that much reflection. But again, this kind of the biggest connection here, and this is the obvious one to draw, maybe why I've been dancing around even mentioning it, is clearly this sets up the beginning for Ichigo's eventual fights with both Byakuya and Renji, right? And so this whole moment is not just their initial sort of introduction to one another. Either Ichigo mentions his entire name. It's kind of neat that because he took up the Kurosaki name, he wouldn't be like, I'm Ichigo Shiba, which would of course let them know everything. And the fact that the Shiba name's maybe even been hidden from Ichigo is, well, definitely been hidden from Ichigo, right? Because he doesn't recognize the Shibas by name as being clearly his cousins. Um, I think that's significant. But nevertheless, cool stuff. Neat setup for what we would eventually return to with all of these characters. So I'm all about it. Anyway, as always, this has been Karakura Gold. Let me know, if you saw any connections here. And thank you so much for sitting through this video. I know it was one of the longer ones. We do typically have longer ones whenever we start a volume. Plus, there's kind of a lot to talk about otherwise in this chapter. As always, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.